All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to try and tackle something pretty dark, pretty heavy, something that's fascinated people for years,
Hmm.
the Gilgo Beach serial killings out on Long Island.
Yeah.
Um, this case has been in the news off and on really since 2010.
Yeah.
And there have been some developments, even fairly recently. So I thought this would be a really good time to do a deep dive. We're going to be using a bunch of different sources. We've got news articles,
Right.
we've got court documents,
Mhm.
and of course, we've got Robert Kolper's book, Lost Girls. I mean,
Oh, a classic.
yeah, it's a must read for anybody who's interested in true crime.
Yeah, it's really good.
So where do we even begin with a case like this? I mean, there are so many different angles, so many twists and turns.
Well, I think a good place to start is with Shannan Gilbert.
Okay.
Her disappearance back in May 2010
Mhm.
was really the catalyst for everything that followed.
Right, right. She was the 24-year-old escort who vanished after that really frantic 911 call, right?
Exactly.
And the search for her, is that what ultimately led to the discovery of the first victim?
That's right. In December of 2010, the remains of Melissa Barthélemy were found along Ocean Parkway.
Wrapped in burlap, if I'm remembering correctly.
You are, yeah, and it was
Oh
just
my.
like the beginning. It's like you pull on one thread,
Yeah.
and this whole horrific tapestry starts to unravel.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing image that, finding those remains wrapped in burlap like that.
Yeah.
So Melissa was the first, but she wasn't the last, right? I mean, there were more victims found shortly after that.
Yeah, within days, the bodies of 3 more women were discovered
Oh, wow.
in the same general area.
Hmm.
Maureen Brader Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello.
And all 4 of those women were escorts and had advertised their services on Craigslist.
Exactly. They would become known as the Gilgo Four.
The Gilgo Four. Okay, so we've got 4 victims, all found in a relatively short period of time, all in the same general area. I mean, what was the initial reaction from investigators? Were they thinking serial killer right away?
It's interesting. Initially, there was some debate about whether it was one killer or multiple killers.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, the victims were pretty diverse in terms of their profiles.
Mm.
Their ages range from early 20s to late 30s.
Oh, okay.
And the methods of disposal, they weren't identical. So that led some investigators to consider maybe there were multiple people involved.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was really a puzzle right from the start.
Yeah.
But as more evidence emerged, the theory of a single perpetrator started to gain traction.
Okay. So what kind of evidence pointed them in that direction? Was there something specific that linked these murders together?
One of the key things was the way the bodies were bound.
Oh, okay.
The knots used were very unusual, very complex, suggests a particular skill or habit, and they were consistent across all 4 victims.
So it wasn't just anybody who could have tied these knots. It was somebody who had some kind of knowledge of how to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
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 Right. And, there were similarities in the condition of the remains, other forensic evidence that we can dig into later.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that really started to build a case for a single killer.
So at this point, investigators, they're dealing with the Gilgo Four.
Right.
They suspect a single perpetrator. I mean, they're probably like poring over every detail of these women's lives, looking for connections, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They were trying to understand who these women were, what their lives were like, who they knew, anything that could give them a lead.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's gotta be like finding a needle in a haystack.
Oh,
I
it's
feel-
incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
especially with, cases that involve sex work. There's often a lot of secrecy involved, and it can be really hard to track down witnesses or get reliable information.
Right. But just as they're trying to piece together those connections, the case takes another turn.
Yep.
And we'll get into that right after the break.
So in March and April of 2011,
Okay.
6 more sets of remains,
Whoa, hold on, 6 more.
6 more,
Hmm.
are discovered, but not all in Gilgo.
Oh, so this isn't just a Gilgo Beach thing anymore.
No, these remains were scattered across Suffolk and Nassau counties,
Okay.
and some of them were identified relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, and Karen Vergata.
Okay.
But what's really eerie is that, partial remains of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack had actually been found years earlier
Oh, wow.
in Manorville.
Okay, and Manorville, that's like 40 miles away from Gilgo, right?
Yeah, about 40 miles.
So now, I mean, investigators are dealing with what? 10 victims?
10 victims, yeah.
And they got to figure out, okay, are these newly discovered victims connected to the Gilgo 4?
Right.
And if so, is it the same killer? I mean, the pressure must have been immense.
Oh, yeah, the case just exploded.
Hmm.
And to add to that, 3 of those victims, they still haven't been identified.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have Peaches, a young African-American woman. She had a distinctive peach tattoo.
Okay.
Baby Doe, a toddler. She was found wrapped in a blanket.
Oh, my gosh.
And Asian Doe, they believe she may have been transgender.
Yeah.
So each discovery just added another layer of complexity and heartbreak, really, to this case.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's heartbreaking to think about those unidentified victims. Their families, still out there, still wondering what happened. We've got a lot to unpack here, but before we go any further, I think it's important to take a moment to acknowledge the victims, right? I mean, we're talking about real people here.
Real lives.
With real families
Yeah.
who are absolutely devastated by these crimes. And it's easy to get caught up in the investigative details, but we can't forget the human cost of all of this.
Yeah, that's a really important point. These weren't just names in a police report. These were daughters, mothers, sisters, friends.
Exactly.
They had stories. And each one of those losses left a hole in the lives of people who loved them.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the investigation, we've got these 10 victims, some identified, some not,
Right.
and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any theories or suspects that emerged in those early years of the investigation?
Yeah, there were a lot of theories floating around.
Oh, really?
And they kind of evolved as more information came out.
Okay.
Early on, the possibility of multiple killers, that was a big one.
Okay, so why multiple?
Well, given how diverse the victim profiles seemed,
Mm.
in the different ways the bodies were disposed of,
Mm.
some investigators thought, well, maybe we're not dealing with just one person. There were even some who considered like satanic cults or organized crime.
Wow. Okay, so a lot of different angles to consider. Did any of those early theories gain more traction than others?
As the investigation went on, the evidence started pointing more and more towards a single perpetrator.
Okay.
Remember those complex knots we talked about?
Yeah.
They became a really crucial piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
They were so unique,
Yeah.
so consistently used. It really suggested a specific skill, a habit,
Mm-hmm.
that this wasn't just some random act.
Right. So one killer with a particular MO, a particular way of binding his victims. That's pretty chilling.
Yeah.
Did that lead them to any suspects?
There were a few people who came under scrutiny.
Okay.
One was John Bittrolf. He was a convicted murderer from Manorville.
Okay.
He killed sex workers.
Oh, wow.
And his crimes, they shared some similarities to the Gilgo Beach killings.
Oh, okay.
And, the fact that he was from Manorville, where some of the remains were found,
Right.
that made him a person of interest, for sure.
So did they ever connect him to the Gilgo Beach murders? Like, definitively?
They never found anything conclusive.
Oh, okay.
But he was convicted of 2 murders. Okay. And he's serving 2 life sentences.
Okay.
The Gilgo Beach investigation, it kept going, but for years, it seemed like a cold case.
Yeah, I can imagine that was incredibly frustrating for the families. Just like so many unanswered questions. Was there ever a point where it seemed like they might never find the killer?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
There were times when hope was fading,
Yeah.
but then July 2023,
Okay.
a bombshell. Rex Heuermann,
Okay.
59 years old,
An architect.
an architect from Massapequa Park, he was arrested.
Oh, wait, so they finally got their guy after all those years.
They did.
That's incredible. What finally led them to him?
It was really a combination of things, good old-fashioned detective work
Okay.
and modern forensic technology.
Okay.
Cell phone records put Heuermann in contact with the victims
Okay.
before they disappeared.
Okay.
And then his internet search history,
Yeah.
that revealed a really disturbing pattern.
Okay, like what was he searching?
He was searching for things like sadistic materials, child pornography.
Whoa. Hold on. Sadistic materials. That's really disturbing. So investigators are seeing these searches and they're like, okay, this might be a direct link to the murders.
Absolutely. I mean, those searches, the cell phone data,
Yeah.
it all started to paint a very disturbing picture.
Yeah.
And then there was the DNA.
Okay.
They got a DNA sample from Heuermann from a pizza crust that he discarded.
Hold on. A pizza crust. So they found their guy because of a pizza crust.
It matched a hair found on one of the victims.
Wow, that's amazing police work. Makes me never want to order delivery again. But But wait, if he was so careful with the bodies, why would he be so careless with, like, a pizza crust?
That's one of the things that's so baffling about this case.
Yeah.
Is like he had this distorted sense of risk, meticulous in some ways, incredibly sloppy in others.
Okay, so we've got the cell phone records, we've got the internet searches, we've got DNA from a pizza crust, all pointing to Heuermann. It seems, I mean, kind of open and shut, right? Did this finally bring some closure to this whole long, winding case?
Well, not quite.
Oh, no.
Remember Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castilla?
Yeah.
They were two of the victims who were initially thought to be unrelated.
Hmm.
Well, June 2024, Heuermann is indicted for their murders as well.
Whoa, hold on. So this isn't just a, like, spree over a couple of years. This goes back further.
Much further.
Mm.
These indictments suggest that Heuermann may have been active for decades, possibly since the early 90s. And even now, the investigation continues.
Wow.
He's currently under investigation for the death of Valerie Mack, too. Her death was in 2000.
It just keeps getting more and more complex. And what about Peaches, Baby Doe, and Asian Doe, the victims who are still unidentified? Is there any hope of ever learning their names and bringing some peace to their families?
That's a question that weighs on everybody involved,
Hmm.
but there is hope. You know, DNA technology, genealogical research,
Yeah.
they've been instrumental in solving cold cases, even ones going back decades.
Right. I mean, look at Valerie Mack and Karen Fergata. They were only identified recently, right?
Exactly. Valerie in 2020
Wow.
through genealogical research, and Karen in 2022. So there's still a chance, even for Peaches, Baby Doe, and Asian Doe.
Yeah, that's incredible. They were able to put names to those victims after all those years. So what about Shannan Gilbert? I mean, her disappearance started this whole investigation, but her case is still really controversial, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Authorities ruled her death an accidental drowning, but her family believes she was murdered. I mean, where does her case stand now?
Shannan Gilbert's case,
Hmm.
it's a tangled web of conflicting information.
Yeah.
Unanswered questions. You know, the official ruling is accidental drowning, but
Yeah.
a lot of people, including her family, they believe there's more to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2022, they released the 911 call. You hear the panic in her voice. You hear her pleading for help.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to reconcile that with just a simple drowning.
It's definitely a case that leaves you with more questions than answers. But before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about the victims. You know, we've mentioned their names. I want to take a deeper dive into their stories, the human lives behind the headlines. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, for example, she was a mother of two,
Right.
resorted to sex work to make ends meet. Her story really highlights the vulnerability of women who are struggling financially. They may feel they have no other options.
Absolutely. And this case really shines a light on a very tragic reality. Women involved in sex work, they're often marginalized. They face increased risks.
Yeah.
They might be less likely to report crimes for fear of judgment, or fear of reprisal. And sadly, their disappearances, they may not always be treated with the same urgency as other cases.
Right, right. And then there's Melissa Barthelemy. Her disappearance was made even more horrific because of those chilling phone calls from the alleged killer to her younger sister, Amanda.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the terror of receiving those calls? Hearing your loved one's voice used to taunt you like that?
Those calls were absolutely bone-chilling.
Yeah.
They revealed a level of cruelty it's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah.
But they also ended up being a crucial link to Heuermann years later.
Really?
Yeah, when cell phone records connected those calls to him.
Wow. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there can be a glimmer of hope. You know, a piece of evidence that emerges to help bring a perpetrator to justice. And then there's Peaches and Baby Doe,
Right.
the unidentified mother and daughter,
Yeah.
found in separate locations. I mean, their story just adds another layer of heartbreak to all of this.
It really does. It's just unimaginable.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're still unidentified, it deepens the mystery and the sorrow surrounding this case. And every victim deserves a name, a story, a chance for their loved ones to find some measure of closure.
It's overwhelming to think about the ripple effect of these crimes. The families left to pick up the pieces, the communities grappling with fear and uncertainty. Even with Heuermann's arrest, the Gilgo Beach killings cast a long shadow.
Absolutely. This case is a reminder that even in seemingly idyllic places like Long Island, Darkness can lurk right beneath the surface. It forces us to confront some really uncomfortable realities: violence, vulnerability, the complexities of human nature.
Yeah.
And while, of course, the pursuit of justice is paramount, the healing process for the families, for the community, it's going to be long and arduous.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So many questions remain unanswered. Could there be more victims out there? What does Heuermann's arrest mean for the future of the investigation? And how did he manage to operate undetected for so long?
I mean, those are the questions investigators are wrestling with right now.
Yeah.
Could there be more victims?
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought. They're looking at unsolved cases all over Long Island, even beyond, trying to find any possible connection to Heuermann.
Yeah, I mean, if his crimes go back decades, that's a lot of ground to cover. Are they looking beyond Long Island because they think he might have traveled to commit these crimes?
It's a possibility. His work as an architect, it took him to different places.
Okay.
So they're tracing his movements really carefully,
Hmm.
trying to see if any of his trips line up with unsolved cases in other areas. It's like a giant macabre jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, speaking of piecing things together, what does Heuermann's arrest mean for the investigation going forward? Does it, like, change their approach at all?
He was a huge break in the case,
Yeah.
but it's not the end of the story. Now the focus shifts to building a really solid case against him and figuring out just how many crimes he might be responsible for. Investigators are looking at everything: his home, his work, his relationships, his online activity, anything that could point to more victims or give them some insight into his motives.
I mean, it's a massive undertaking, but it sounds like they're really committed to getting to the bottom of all of this. There's a question that's been bugging me, though. How did he manage to stay under the radar for so long? I mean, he was just a regular guy, architect living in the suburbs. How do you conceal that kind of darkness for decades?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really shows how complex people can be. The ability to compartmentalize, to present this normal face to the world while hiding these terrible secrets. Investigators are digging into his past, his personality, trying to figure out if there were any signs, any red flags that people missed.
It makes you wonder if maybe somebody had noticed something, said something, if things might have gone differently. But what about his family? His wife, his kids? Did they know? Did they have any idea what he was allegedly capable of?
That's hard to say. Investigators have said that Heuermann's wife was out of state every time they think a murder happened, and they haven't found any evidence to suggest that she knew anything about his alleged crimes.
Yeah.
As for his kids, it's just a heartbreaking situation all around.
It really is. We've been talking a lot about the investigation, about Heuermann, but I want to circle back to the victims. We can't forget that these were real people with real lives.
You're so right. It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of it all, but we have to remember the human beings at the center of this story. These were daughters, mothers, sisters, friends,
Exactly.
each one with their own hopes and dreams, people who love them.
Their stories deserve to be told. We talked about Maureen Brainerd Barnes working to support her kids and Melissa Barthélemy, whose sister was tormented by those phone calls. What about the others? Are there any details about their lives that stand out to you?
Megan Waterman, one of the Gilgo Four, she was a young mother who wanted to be a chef. People who knew her said she was loving and devoted to her daughter. And Amberlynn Costello, another one of the Gilgo Four. She was known for her laugh, her kindness. She struggled with addiction, but everyone said she was a good person who deserved so much better than what happened to her.
It's just heartbreaking to think about all the potential that was lost. And then there's Peaches and Baby Doe, the mother and daughter who are still unidentified. It's impossible to imagine what their lives were like, what brought them to Gilgo Beach. But their story just emphasizes how vulnerable women and children are, especially those who are marginalized or struggling.
Yeah, their case really shows how easily people can fall through the cracks, how their disappearances can go unnoticed for so long. It highlights the need for awareness, for compassion, for support, for the people in our society who are most at risk.
It's a really powerful reminder and a call to action. We can't just turn away from this. We have to do better, be better for those who are vulnerable.
I agree. This case forces us to look at some hard truths about our society, the systems that fail people, that allow these things to happen. We have to challenge our own biases, our prejudices, and work to build a society that values and protects everyone.
It's a tough road ahead, but it's a journey we have to take. We've covered a lot today: the details of the case, the investigation, the impact on the victims and their families. But it's important to remember, this is just one perspective. There's still so much more to learn, so many more questions to ask.
Definitely. This case, with all its twists and turns, challenges us to think critically, to question everything. It reminds us that truth can be hard to find, that justice can be slow, and that the search for both never really ends.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep learning about this case. Dig deeper into the victims' stories. Ask the tough questions. You can read Robert Kolker's book, Lost Girls. Check out the Suffolk County Police Department's website, gilgonews.com. Stay informed.
Remember, the pursuit of truth and justice depends on all of us. By staying involved, asking questions, demanding accountability, we can honor the memory of the victims and work to prevent these tragedies from happening again.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Gilgo Beach killings. It's been a difficult but important conversation. We hope you've come away with a better understanding of this complex case. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.